and welcome on Facebook Live. We are in the third part of the 4-part series on the Kabbalah psychology, understanding who we are and what is the makeup of our soul, of our personality, of who we are. And so we spoke in the first week about our emotions of love, fear, and caring, and pity. And we spoke in the second week about our instincts, about the instinct to win, the instinct to surrender, the instinct for intimacy, to transform that relationship, the instinct for action and results. And now this week, we are going to talk about our mind, right? We all have a head on our shoulders, and we have a mind, we have a brain. And so the question is, what is it? What are its functions? And how can we use the brain and the mind to transform their emotions? Which is the reason why we're doing it in this order, because first we want to describe the emotions and the instincts, which is the part of ourselves that typically we are aware of. We kind of are aware of our emotions for love, for fear, our instincts and things like that. But our mind is a little bit more abstract. And so the mind is actually the key of how to have healthy emotions. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So there's also 3. We're also going to talk about the 3 tonight. There are the 3 parts of the mind in Kabbalistic understanding of the mind. It's actually interesting, as you'll see, there's actually with modern understanding of the brain, there are some overlaps and correlation between these 3. So the Zohar says that there are 3 parts to the brain or to the mind. And it says that the 3 parts of the mind actually correspond to the 3 parts of the brain. And these are Chochmo, Bina, and Daas. Chochma, literally in the most common usage of the word, would translate as wisdom. And we're going to see that that is a partial understanding of what it means, but there's more to the picture. And then Bina is the second part, and that literally translates as understanding. And there's also more to that, but that's a pretty good definition. And Daas is typically translated in English as knowing, and that is a very, very partial understanding of the Kabbalistic understanding of what Daas is. So you may be familiar with the idea of the right brain and the left brain. You know, that's very popular these days. So there's a very similar idea, the right brain and the left brain. The right, Chochma, is on the right, and Bina is on the left, and Daas is front and center. You may have heard of the executive part of the brain. Makes decisions. So we're going to talk about that. So let's start off with Chochma. And Chochma is typically is associated with creativity. Creativity, intuition, that ability to come up with a new idea, and things like that. And basically, that is part of what Chochma does. You know, talk about creativity, you'll hear a creative person. I remember reading once an interview with a musician who composes music, right? And she was describing what goes on in her mind. And she said, basically, they asked her a question, do you make up your songs in parts or in one go? And she said, well, actually what happens is that I'm just going about my business, doing my thing. And all of a sudden, I just feel music just appearing in my brain. And I just have to get it out. And if I don't get it out right now, I'm going to forget it. And she goes straight to the piano and starts playing, and it just comes out, and boom, she has a new song. So it seems to come from nowhere, right? Just one moment. Excuse me. So, you know, we've heard of this idea of the creativity. But the question is, where's creativity coming from, and how can we develop more creativity? And there are some people who are very creative. You know, some people are very creative, got great ideas. Some people are very creative in marketing. Some people are very creative in art and music or whatever it may be. Some people are very creative in science. They're coming up with new theories, as opposed to some people are always just working with the information that they have. So creativity is a general term that we use for someone who comes up with something new. But where does this newness come from? So we're going to talk about tonight is that in the world of Chochmo, which is where creativity comes from, we're going to learn about the secret of how to develop more creativity. And that is because Chochmo is not actually creativity. We say Chochmo is wisdom, but even wisdom is creative ideas, right? But it's also limited. What is wisdom? Wisdom is a creative idea. When you have a problem, you come to the wise sage, and he or she will tell you, this is your solution. This is what you should do. So they're coming up with a new idea of it to apply to a problem. So wisdom is also a kind of creativity. It's more creativity of ideas as opposed to creativity of art or music or whatever it may be. But the question is, all of these have in common is that it's a new idea, but where did this idea come from? So in Kabbalah, it talks about that at the very top, there's something called ayin, which is nothingness. And this nothingness is a conduit to everything. And so ironically, the way it works is that what stops us being creative is all of the things we already know, right? Whatever we know actually blocks us from experiencing something new, right? They always do. Every time someone comes with a new idea, they always have to fight the status quo. What's going on is everybody knows, in business, this is the way we do it. The way you sell is ... This is the way we do art. The way you do it is you have to do it with this method and this way. This is the way. There's always this is the way we do it. And that is what this is the way we do it. The status quo is really a collection of all of what we know and all of what we feel and all of our experiences, all packaged into one big package of what we know. And what we know becomes our understanding and a way we approach a situation. But creativity means you have to come up with something new. But in order to come up with something new, all of what we know and experience and everything, all the collective wisdom on the street actually blocks the new idea from coming through because it's being blocked. It's like, imagine a tree, you plant a seed, right? And you want it to sprout something new. But guess what? If you put it into soft earth and the earth is very nimble and soft, or even before you put it into earth, you put it in water. Why do you put the seed in water? Because this sprouting of the seed is so delicate and so new that the slightest blockage is going to stop the seed from sprouting. So if you start off the seed in mud, in earth, it's not going to sprout. You start it off in water, it will sprout because there's very, very little resistance. And so what I'm trying to get at is that the key to the creative experience of Chochmah is actually the nothingness that must come before the insight that comes from Chochmah. So Chochmah is actually nothingness, stillness. The way it's described in Kabbalah and Hasidism is Chochmah is described as awe, as wonder. It's a sense of awe and wonder about the smallness of the human being versus the vastness of the universe, the vastness of God's existence. And so awe it's not even emotional. It's not, because fear is an emotion that we feel because I still exist. Awe is the feeling or the sense that I don't exist, right? When you're so overpowered by something so magnificent and so powerful and so special, it makes me feel so small and insignificant and as a tiny little dot as part of it. So the Chochmah is compared to the letter Yud. In the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, we have different letters. All of the letters take up space. But there's one letter that's just a dot. And that is the letter Yud. It's the sound is equivalent of a Y in English. But in Hebrew, it's the letter Yud, which is just a dot. And the dot represents the sense of nothingness, the sense of awe, the sense of total overwhelm in being part of something so much bigger and so much more amazing that I feel so small. And when I feel so small, it clears out all of my preconditions and my preconceptions and my assumptions and my knowledge and my experience because everything, all of that gets in the way. And so genuine Chochma is actually a sense of awe, of humility, but not just being humble, say, oh, you go first. It's an essential humility where I question my very ego. My whole ego is questioned. My whole sense of self is questioned because I'm being elevated into being part of something bigger. When I'm in Chochma mode, I'm not thinking of myself as an individual. I'm thinking of myself as a small part of a vast universe. So Chochma is actually, but it's conscious. It's actually a conscious mindset, but it's a consciousness of nothingness, of humility, of awe, of overwhelm, of self-nullification. And when we are in this quiet space, is a quiet space. Some people reach the space through meditation. Some people reach this space through trance. Some people reach this space through being challenged by somebody else. Imagine if you had a belief and you're espousing your opinion, and somebody comes and completely destroys your opinion, and you're completely, your opinion now is completely obliterated, and you're just left like, now what? Everything I was saying has been completely disproven. So what are you left with? You're left with the nothingness. That nothingness now becomes the canvas that allows for something new to appear, because the nothingness allows you to be the conduit to a deeper insight that comes from the very depth of our soul. It comes from the very depth of existence itself. It comes from being part of the oneness of the universe, which is all included in the oneness of Hashem, the oneness of God. So the real essence of Chochma is actually a very abstract concept. And the part of Chochma that people notice, which is the creative side, is what people talk about, right? People say, oh, the creative side of the brain, the creative person. That's wonderful. But that's only the expression of Chochma creating. But before Chochma can create, it has to feel the nothingness. It has to feel being part of the oneness. I remember there's an ad on NPR. It talks about how the interconnectedness of the whole universe. Is some foundation or something that they're promoting and saying that the ethos of this foundation is to realize that everything in the universe is interconnected. When we realize that we are interconnected into the whole universe, we are a part of one great whole, which of course, spiritually speaking, is that itself is an expression of godliness. So as Jews, we know that the primary message of Judaism is that there's one God, and the whole universe is an expression of the oneness of God. So this is actually Chochma, and actually a transition to, if you start climbing the ladder, it actually leads to belief in God and leads to the holisticness of the whole universe. But it is the essence of Chochma is a little abstract, but when it acts, it's very observable, the creative force. But as I was saying, the creativity of Chochma is only really a manifestation of Chochma, whereas Chochma itself is a state of being, of an awareness of I am not my own existence, but I am part of a greater existence. And when we experience those moments of awe and self-nullification and surrender, and sometimes it's through seeing very, very beautiful scenery. Sometimes it's through seeing beautiful architecture. Sometimes it's through listening to tremendous, beautiful music. Sometimes it's through hearing an amazing idea. Sometimes it's just through quieting our mind until we're able to say, I'm not going to focus on what I understand. I'm not going to focus on what I think. I'm just going to go to the stillness and that quietness of the very essence of existence itself, where I am part of a greater whole, and where I sense that I am, that we are all really one. And so that's why Chochma is the key to spirituality, is the key to what we traditionally call getting in touch with our soul. This is all language of the soul, of spirituality, of intuition, and this is what the essence of Chochma is. When we are developing, in order to strengthen our creativity, we have to strengthen this quiet moment. That is why you'll notice that often people report that their most creative time is when they're taking a shower, right? When you're in the shower, you're under the flowing water, and our sense of identity goes away because we're not wearing clothes. We're not in the middle of a job, but there's no career. There's no, right? What am I under a shower? I'm just a being who's under flowing water. I'm not even got any clothes on. So the sense of humility and nullification is there. The sense of I'm not focusing on my job or where I have to run to. All of that goes away. So we get to a quiet space. And that's why people find that that's when they're very creative. All of a sudden, a new idea pops into their head. Why? Because they're able to quiet all the noise and all the challenges to allowing Chochma to percolate and to express itself. So if you want to strengthen our creativity and our intuition and our ability to have insight and wisdom, it's by going to this quiet space of Chochma. It's a place in our mind, which typically rests in the right side of the head, the right brain, where it allows us to sense that really everything is one, and I am part of that oneness. And that is why the part of the body that expresses Chochma is the eyes. Because eyesight, when you look, you're able to see everything in one go. You don't necessarily see and understand every part of it, of what you're seeing, but you get to see everything in one go. You just look and you see a whole scenery in one go. How long would it take you to describe what you're seeing? It could take you hours and hours and days to describe all the details of what you're seeing, but you just see it in one go, because the eyesight is about sensing the oneness and the greatness and the awesomeness of existence and of the whole system, and realizing I'm just part of that system, even though there's no understanding at this stage. But this is the key to creativity. But talking of understanding, now there's another whole side of the brain, another whole side of the mind, and that is Bina. Bina means to understand. And understanding is a whole different kettle of fish. Understanding is about measurement and is about articulation, is about explaining the idea. I had a teacher who used to ask us if we understood what we were learning, and when we would say yes, then he would say, okay, now explain it to your friend. I'm like, but I understand it already. Why do I need to explain it? He says, when you explain it, then we'll see if you really understood it. If you can really describe the detail and explain it to somebody else, then you have shown that you understand what we're talking about. Another way of knowing that you understand what you're talking about is to write it down. I remember I had a friend of mine who was working on a certain project, and he was kind of having difficulty getting it off the ground and trying to figure out what's what. And so he went to his father and tried to explain to him what he was trying to do, and his father sensed that he didn't have a full grasp of clarity of what he was trying to do. So he said, why don't you write it down as a proposal, and then we'll see. And he struggled really, really hard to write it down. And eventually he got it. But the reason why he struggled to write it down was actually because he didn't really understand it himself. So explaining an idea to somebody else, writing down the idea with the sentences and structure is actually A, proof that we understand what we're talking about, and B, it's actually a tool to force us to understand it if we find that we're struggling to understand something. When we force ourselves to explain it to somebody else, force ourselves to write it down, we're actually forcing our brain to use our capacity to understand. It's like exercising that muscle, just like you would, if you feel weak, you would do push-ups and pull-ups, and you would actually strengthen your muscle. So if you force yourself to explain and to write down the idea of what you think you understand, you're forcing yourself to understand it. So this is the complete opposite spectrum, whereas Chochma was the intuition and a sense of the oneness, which allows us to come up with new ideas. And by the way, when you come up with a new idea, not every new idea is a good idea, right? Sometimes you come up with a new idea and it's a silly idea. Sometimes you come up with a new piece of art and it looks ugly, frankly, right? A piece of music and it's a flop. It does happen. But when do you know that? Bina. Bina is the understanding part of the brain to analyze, to question, to understand. We actually need Bina to act as a partner with Chochma to make sure that the new idea that Chochma came up with should actually be helpful and relevant and add up, and the data should add up, right? So Bina is driven by data. Chochma is driven by intuition. So intuition very often is helpful, but sometimes it's just left field, and it's like, hello, what is that? How's that going to help? Well, it's an idea. But you have to be careful not to analyze the ideas when you're coming up with new ideas, because if you're going to start measuring and analyzing the ideas before the idea percolated, then you're going to shut down the creative process. So the creative process has to feel free. It has to be carefree. It has to have that humility, that awe that we spoke about, that nothingness, to allow it to come up with new ideas. You can't be measuring at that time and judging at that time, because then you're going to shut off the creativity valve, because it's all about that clean slate. But once you have the clean slate and you have a new idea, then we have to take it to the left side of the brain to measure it, to understand it, say, hey, is this really useful information? Or is this just another hocus pocus idea? So understanding is what Bina is all about. Now, one of the advantages of Bina, of understanding, is that it's unbiased, and it's impartial. And now, Bina, when we understand something, it can be affected by our feelings. But I'm talking about true understanding when we divest it from any feeling, when we're just in our head, understanding the idea, we're reading a book and we're thinking about it and analyzing it, and really all in our head, right? So if you are genuinely having a Bina experience, so all about understanding and analyzing, and you're not letting your emotions get in the way, it's completely impartial. The reason why we're being partial and being biased is because we let our emotions get in the way, which is very common. I'm going to speak about that soon, about how to keep our emotions in check. Most of us, our emotions have an opinion even when we're trying to understand something, right? You're reading a piece of data and it's telling you X, Y, and Z, but at the same time, we have our feelings, our attraction and rejection, and all kinds of, and instincts are getting involved. Oh, but who said that piece of data? Who shared with me that piece of data? It was that person, but I hate that person, so therefore I'm going to reject the message that person gave me, or and so on and so forth, right? We let our emotions cloud our understanding. But here we're talking about, if we are able to divest ourselves from our emotions and just understand for the sake of understanding, it's going to be impartial and unbiased. In fact, I remember in yeshiva, in rabbinical school, a fascinating experience. We were all in class, and the rabbi, the equivalent of a professor, was giving a lecture, right, on deep and abstract concepts in the Talmud. And this was a lecture that would only happen once a week. The rest of the time we'd study on our own, and then you would kind of have a lecture once a week to summarize and to give his take on what we were discussing. And he gets up there, this lecture is normally an hour and a half, and he starts talking. And part of the Talmudic style of study is you're allowed to ask questions and you're allowed to challenge the teacher in the class. You bring up a different angle of the idea, or a different source, or different text, or different opinion. Anyway, so in the middle of his lecture, somebody raised his hand and asked a question, challenging what he said. And he heard what he said, and he thought for a second, and he responded, and he kept going. Somebody else then asked a question, and he paused, and he's thinking, and he said, something, based on that question you just asked, quoting a section of the Talmud in a different tractate, my whole thesis falls apart. And so he closed his book and he sat down in the middle of his lecture, because he was so focused on truth, and he was presenting his idea, but he was more concerned about the truth of his idea than the fact that it was his idea. And so long as he thought he was right, he was happy to present. But when somebody had challenged him and he had actually thought it through, he spent that, and he realized that he had made a mistake. There was no point in him continuing in his whole beautiful structure and thesis if the foundation wasn't there. So this was someone who was living in his mind. There was no emotion. It wasn't about me and about him and about love and about fear. What are they going to say about me? He was all in his head. He was analyzing the data. He was analyzing the information for the purity of the experience of analyzing the information to get to an honest and fair conclusion. And when somebody else shot down his argument and he had no way to defend it, there was no point continuing with his opinion. And that is because pure Bina, pure faculty of understanding, is unbiased, does not have an agenda. It just wants to let the data take you where the data is going to take you. That is what Bina is all about. It's about dissecting and analyzing. And I'm sure you all know a colleague or a friend or a relative who just loves to analyze, loves to argue, loves to debate, loves to, I remember was a group of us friends, we were watching a movie together. And one of the guys in the middle of the movie started pointing out, he said, hey, you see what just happened, that scene over there? That doesn't make sense because 5 minutes ago, the scene was the opposite and he's in the wrong place. And the guy's like, okay, let's move on. We're watching a movie. 5 minutes later, he's like, but you see over there, this part doesn't make. And basically, even watching a movie for him was an experience of Bina. He was so focused in his Bina, in his analysis and his focus on data and understanding and analyzing. We call him the analyst, right? All he wants to do is analyze information. He won't let, someone who's high in Bina will not let data or information of any sort come into them, into their mind or into their brain without analyzing it and deciding whether it's true and can be shelved in their storage locker of information, or if it's not true and it gets rejected. So Bina is constantly analyzing and debating and questioning, is this accurate? Is this true? Does it make sense? If it makes sense, it will accept it as another piece of information for its collection of information. And if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't add up, then Bina will reject it. Whereas many people who are not high in Bina will be accepting information through their emotions, right? When you hear a statement, if I say the sky is blue, right? You could accept that information as a description, as a cold description, or you can accept it as an emotion describing, oh, what a beautiful day, time to have fun, enjoy the sun, right? So people can hear the same information and take it in different ways, interpreting it in different ways. But if somebody is high in Bina, they're going to analyze the information before they accept it. And someone who is high in Bina, the analyst, is basically like a computer, right? And we all know people like that who are like computers, and they're hard to have relationships with, because when a man or a woman is like a computer, a relationship has to be more than just about cold facts and data being transferred from person to person. A relationship is about emotion, about feeling, about experience. There's a lot more to it. But if somebody is just a data analyst and they treat their life like a data analyst, they're going to have a hard time in a relationship. But when it comes to analyzing data, it's very helpful, super helpful to be an analyst. So this is a tool of the brain, the left side of the brain, to be an analyst, to analyze information and to question, is it true, is it not true, to be impartial. It's very helpful for a judge, for example, to be high in Bina, to be an analyst, to be impartial. They don't want to get carried away by the emotions of the case, right? That's unhelpful if you're a judge or if you're a data programmer, etc. You want to just focus on the data, on the A turns to B, B turns to C, C turns to D. It's all sequential and data based, etc., which is very helpful in certain areas in life, but it can be a big detriment in other areas of life. So I hope that brings some clarity to the concept of Bina. So we have the quietness of the sense of awe and the sense of oneness that is in the right side of the brain, which is eyesight. And then we have Bina, which is to analyze data. And by the way, that is where hearing is associated with. Hearing, when you hear information, that's where you get data. Seeing, even though reading is seeing, but reading is really hearing, just hearing through your eyes. When we talk about seeing, we don't mean reading, we mean looking at a scene. When you take in a whole scene in one go, you're not getting the data about that scene, but you're getting the full picture of the scene. But hearing is about breaking down the information into digestible bits of data that can then be analyzed and compared and judged and understood, etc. Now we come to the third part of the mind, or the third part of the brain, and we call it Daas. Daas, which we said literally means to know, but for our concept, we're going to describe it as the decider. Daas means decision making. Focus, Daas means the type of knowledge that is focused. And focus leads to decision making. What do I mean? Bina is all about the data, but Bina does not have the capacity to make any decisions because data is endless. You can keep analyzing and keep analyzing and keep analyzing, but you're never going to come to a decision to say, 1 second, so is this a good plan or a bad plan? Is this a good idea or a bad idea? You ask a Mr. Bina and he doesn't know because Bina just loves to analyze. Ask him for any statistics about anything and he'll tell you, she'll tell you. But ask him or her to make a decision based on those statistics, like, oh, I don't know. Just because 50% of these people do that, but the other percent, there's a small percentage that does that. And there's another percentage that does that. And there's more information, and it never stops because it's always Bina is programmed to analyze. Daas is what we call executive function, which is the ability to make decisions. And in order to make a decision, you have to focus. You have to say, 1 second, what is my goal over here? My goal over here is I'm trying to get a certain result. If I'm trying to get a certain result, I need to make a plan to get to that result. If I want to make a plan, I need to make decisions. Because after all, what is planning? Planning is a bunch of decisions grouped together to make a plan to fulfill your goal. We're going to talk about goals next week because that already deals with the more abstract concepts of the soul. We're going to talk about that next week. But Daas is about focusing on the plan, saying, hang on a second, why are we in this meeting again? Right? So you have, you're at a board meeting or you're at a meeting with friends, you're planning something and someone's rattling on and going on and on and on because they have so much information to share. And then you have one person who's very focused, say, hang on a second, we have half an hour. What was the purpose of this meeting again? What results are we trying to achieve? Let's stay focused. Let's stay on the plan. Let's stay making decisions so we can now all know what the plan is when we leave this meeting. So Daas is all about decision making, and decision making is the root of planning, and planning is the key to turning an idea into something that you can act on. And so Daas is the third leg. We spoke about how Chochmo, Bina, and Daas is in the middle. So you have a new idea, right? You had a quiet moment and you were able to come up with a new idea. And maybe it was a good idea, maybe it was a bad idea, I don't know. So we sent it to Bina, and Bina starts analyzing and saying, 1 second, does this add up? Is this a good plan? Does it have, is it got stable? Is it on a 4-legged idea, or is it just a hocus pocus idea? Or is it, and if it turns out that it's a silly idea, then Bina will send a message back to Chochmo and say, you need to come up with a new idea because that idea was silly. So Chochmo comes up with a new idea and they send it back to Bina. Bina analyzes and say, you know what? This one makes sense. But now he needs to send it to Daas to say, okay, now what are you going to do about it? Daas is always asking the question, so what? What are you going to do about it? And so Daas is the third function, which is so important to, have you ever come across people who are we call them in Yiddish, Luftmenschen. They're full of air, not full of hot air, like arrogant, but just full of air, meaning they have lots of ideas, lots of thoughts, but it's never concrete. It's never tied down to this world, right? They're floating, right? What's lacking? What's lacking is Daas. Daas is the focus to say, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Okay, what's the plan? Okay, let's decide right now. I'm going to do this, this, and this. It's not actually doing anything about it, because once you start doing things, you're already in the instincts of action and victory and surrender. We're not talking about doing anything. We're just talking about in the planning stage. But the planning stage is where you transition from an idea to start actualizing that idea. So everybody, we spoke last week about how we can be strong in certain areas, and everybody, now that we've kind of summarized the 10, right? We have this quiet space of a sense of oneness of the universe, which brings about intuition and creativity. And some people find themselves to be very comfortable in that space. Some people find themselves very uncomfortable in that space. We have the analyzer. It's all about analyzing. Does it add up? Does it make sense? Is it true? Is it accurate? That's the analyzer. Some people are very comfortable in that space. Some people, this is very hard for them to work on that muscle. Again, the decider, Daas. Some people are very decision oriented. They're always making decisions. You tell them, okay, they're like, okay, what's the plan? What's the plan? Boom, they make a decision and they don't second guess themselves. They focus and make a decision and they run with it, right? Some people are constantly analyzing and they keep analyzing and they go in a loop of analyzing. They don't allow themselves or even come analyzing or coming up with new ideas, whatever. But there's not that focus to say, okay, what's the decision? What's the plan? How many steps to the plan? Each plan, we have to have two choices. What's the decision? That's the thing. Make a plan, we focus, plan, and now we have a project and now go do it. Some people are very strong in what we call executive function of making decisions. Some people are very wishy-washy. They can't focus. They can't make decisions. They're always putting off the decision to tomorrow. Again, when it comes to love, right? We spoke about love and fear. Some people are very loving and generous and giving. Some people not so much. Some people are very fearful and accurate and resistant to change, etc. Some people don't fear at all. They're climbing 500-foot buildings without any fear in the world. Some people are very caring. They see people, they want to heal people, etc. So all of the 10, the 3 mental capacities, the 3 emotional capacities, and then the 3 instinctive capacities, and then action itself, these are really 10 soul powers that can make up the character and the personality of what it means to be a human being. So you'll have one person who's very, very loving and generous, right? And they'll also be very high in netzach, very forceful and aggressive. And maybe they'll also be high in Bina, they'll also be high in analytical, and that will be the mix of their 3 main character traits, their dominant traits, and they may be very weak in 3 others, and may be very, so what I have found in my experience working with some people, because I actually made an assessment that is based on this system, I found that people tend to be high in 3, strong and high in 3 or 4 of these 10. They tend to be weak in 3 or 4 of these 10, and they tend to be average in 3 or 4 of these 10. And so we end up having areas that we don't notice as to be particularly special for us because we're just average. We're somewhere in the middle in how full is the cup of each of these 10. And we have certain areas that we're very drawn to because that's where we're wired to, like in that area, in those 3 or 4, our cup is full. So imagine we're all given 10 cups, right? And the 10 cups are all these 10 powers. And then God fills each one up to a certain degree. What tends to happen is that 3 or 4 of those cups will be full, whether to the top or pretty close to the top. 3 or 4 will be pretty empty, and 3 or 4 will be pretty average. And that has an impact on where our natural state is, the way we're born. It's through nurture, it's through nature. That's not the issue, but basically that's becomes our personality, and that becomes our mixture of strengths, weaknesses, and average. But then the question becomes, is there a way to change any of this? Is there a way to change? Are we just stuck with the hand that we are dealt with when we're born or through nurture and nature, and then become an adult and now that's it? Or is there a way to change? And so the final few minutes that I want to talk about is that yes, Daas is actually the key to change. And so the truth is there's 2 main keys to change, and that is Daas and Malchus. And very briefly, it goes like this. I had a friend who was just a regular guy, and one time someone sent him a link to a website called Infowars.com. I don't know if you've heard of Infowars.com. It's a website full of conspiracy theories. And basically, he sent him a link to an article, and he read it, and it was interesting. So he started, schmying around, browsing on that site, and that led him to the site. Anyway, it got him curious about it. And so for the next few weeks, he was spending a lot of time on these conspiracy theory websites that were proposing all different conspiracy theories about different things that had happened. And then one day he was reading a regular news site, and it was talking about something that happened. And he started reading it, and as soon as he's reading it, all of a sudden he starts thinking of what could be the conspiracy as to explain. I think it was a shooting in a school. He's like, starts thinking, what could be the conspiracy to explain why this shooting happened, not the way that the newspaper was telling him. And he stopped himself. He's like, what's going on over here? He told me after, he's like, what's going on over here? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Why all of a sudden am I proposing a conspiracy theory to explain this shooting? And he realized that because the past few weeks, he had filled his mind with conspiracy theories in all kinds of areas in life, he had actually changed to some degree his way of thinking. And now, instead of him, until a few weeks ago, until the story when his friend sent him that link to Infowars, he never he never focused on conspiracy theories, he never took them seriously, had nothing to do with them. But because he spent those few weeks thinking about it and reading about it and talking about it, he actually rewired his brain to start thinking as a conspiracy theorist. And this exposed for him, and this is something that has now been discovered with neuroscience and different scientific experiments that they're doing, which is this idea that comes from Kabbalah, is that we can actually rewire our brain. We can rewire our brain by what we choose to focus on, what we think about consciously, and what we focus on and what we talk about will actually refocus our mind towards that thing. So if we spend our whole day for 3 weeks straight talking about being kind and generous, we will actually influence ourselves to be more kind and generous. It's actually, our brain is actually not just a static piece of marrow, it's actually a receptacle for new, we can actually fill it with new information that will give us new results. And this is taking place in the Daas part of the brain. So there was a story once where a chassid who once went to his Rebbe for advice, because when he used to pray, he used to pray and he wanted to think about God, and all kinds of thoughts would pop into his head. And he wanted advice, what should I do? So he came to the Rebbe's house, and it was already in the evening, and he knocks on the door, and the Rebbe says, who's there? And he says, who's there? And he says, and why are you here? And he told him why he's here, and he slammed the door in his face, and he didn't let him in. So he knocked again, and he didn't let him in again. And he had no choice, he had to leave, so he went to stay by somebody else. He comes back the next morning, and he knocks on the door again, and the Rebbe says, yes, what can I do for you? He says, Rebbe, I'm here for some advice. When I'm praying, I can't focus, and all these thoughts pop into my head, and I don't know what to do. And the Rebbe said to him, I already gave you the advice last night. He said, last night you kicked me out. He said, exactly. I showed you what to do. What happened? You came to my house and I didn't want you there, so I slammed the door in your face. It's my house and I'm in charge and I decide who comes into my house. He says, your mind belongs to you and you get to decide which thoughts and which ideas and which attitudes reside in your mind. And if you choose to close the door on this thought, you can close the door on this thought. If you choose to open the door on this thought, you open the door on this thought. You get to decide what to think about, what not to think about, because it's your mind. And so the key, but it's challenging. Nobody's saying it's easy. It takes a lot of effort. We have to build up the muscle. Like every muscle that every habit that we have to develop, we have to build it up. And so the first thing is to practice is you can do a simple meditation. Just decide for the next 60 seconds, after we finish this call, just take 60 seconds that you are going to think about one specific thought. And every time you veer away from that thought, give yourself a hit on the hand and see how many times in 60 seconds your brain wanders into all different directions, which is fascinating. What's going on? What's going on is that our mind wanders, but we can control it. But the first stage of controlling it is awareness. When we're aware of what our mind thinks about, and that we say, no, I want to think about this, I want to think about that. And when we feed our mind constant thoughts that we're trying to feed it, after a few weeks, we will actually create a new perception, a new attitude, a new feeling, a new response. Like I said, if you want to be more kind, if you spend every day reading up about kindness and talking about kindness and thinking about kindness, you'll actually discover after a few weeks, you have a new attitude to kindness, and so on with all the others. And very briefly, that was the top-down approach. There's also the bottom-up approach, and that is what we do. Okay, the key to transforming our emotions is what we think comes down, and what we do comes up. So if we want to be more kind, right, if we do acts of kindness, we will actually create new emotions of kindness through the action. And so there's more to talk about. We're running out of time, but I hope this gave a general overview about how the mind works, the three parts of the mind, and how we can use our mind for transformation to develop positive character traits, to minimize negative character traits like anger and jealousy and hatred and all of those. We can minimize them by not focusing on them so much. We can amplify the positive traits that we're looking for by focusing on those traits. And next week, we are going to talk about the very essence of our soul. What makes us tick? What is our motivation in life? What makes us tick? What is the very essence? If we peel back all the layers of the onion, we spoke about these 10 layers of the onion, but once you peel that back, what are you going to find inside as the very essence of who we are? And that will be next week, same time, same place.